"Is this some kind of joke?" barked Gunnery Sergeant Miller, his voice slicing through the tense air like a whip. His Marines stood still, but his piercing gaze wasn't on them. It was locked on the elderly man standing silently behind the firing line. "Do you even know where you are, old man?" he demanded. Dean Peters, 82 years old, dressed in faded jeans and a weathered work shirt, didn't flinch. In his hands, he held a long cloth-wrapped bundle. His stance was calm and unassuming, yet his eyes keen and unblinking took in everything around him. He watched the range flags, each one telling its own story, a noisy, confusing signal the young Marine's advanced gear couldn't decode. "This is an active live-fire range for force reconnaissance snipers," Miller said, stepping toward him. Miller was the modern warrior type, carved features, absolute confidence, and the latest tactical kit. A ballistic computer hugged his wrist. "That thing's worth more than Dean's car. Civilians aren't allowed. I need you to leave." Dean's eyes drifted from the windswept terrain to the gunnery sergeant. Pale blue as a winter sky, they held a depth that absorbed Miller's hostility without returning it. "The wind's tricky today," Dean said in a low, steady voice. "It's not one wind, it's three," Miller snorted. Several younger Marines shifted uncomfortably. They'd spent the morning battling contradictory readings from their state-of-the-art kestrel meters and ballistic solvers that kept spitting out useless firing solutions. The steel silhouette target at over 1,700 yards felt as remote as the moon. The exercise was meant to push them toward the impossible shots, demanded in Afghanistan's mountains or Iraq's deserts, and right now, the impossible was winning. 3 wins. Huh, Miller scoffed, folding his arms. "Listen, Pops, I respect folklore, but we've got equipment for this. We're dealing with Coriolis, spindrift, and barometric swings every 5 minutes. It's more complicated than holding up a wet finger." Dean shrugged. "That computer of yours can't see the thermal off those rocks at 1,000 yards, and it can't feel the downdraft from that ravine to the left. The flag at the target's lying, it shows left to right, but the valley funnels a current the other way, just short of it. You're solving one problem, but the bullet has to fly through 3. Lance Corporal Evans, who'd been watching the mirage churn all morning, lowered his spotting scope. The old man's words made an odd kind of sense, though he wouldn't dare say so to Gunny Miller. Miller's pride smarted at being lectured by the groundskeeper he'd seen mowing near the barracks. "And I suppose you can do better," he sneered, nodding at the cloth-wrapped object in Dean's hands. "What's that, Grandpa's squirrel rifle?" Deliberately, Dean unwrapped the bundle. It wasn't a carbon fiber tactical rig with adjustable chassis. It was wood and steel, a dark oil-seasoned walnut stock scarred by time, a familiar bolt action, and a simple scope without modern turrets or reticles. An M40, a rifle from another era, something the snipers had only seen in museums or old Vietnam photos. The rifle's presence felt surreal. "You can't be serious." That antique reached the target. Miller laughed. "The barrel's probably shot out. Look at that gouge near the bolt. It belongs in a museum. You'll hurt yourself." As Miller jabbed a finger at the worn stock, the range dissolved for Dean. The heat and sun vanished. The world went green and wet. He was 19 again, not 82, lying in a nest of ferns in a Vietnamese jungle. The air thick and suffocating, rain plastering his uniform. The gouge, Miller mocked, was fresh shrapnel from a mortar that had landed too close. He held the same rifle, mud and rain slick on the stock. Through the simple scope he watched a small clearing half a mile away, where an enemy machine gunner was setting up to pin down a platoon. He controlled only his breathing, exhaled halfway, and settled the crosshairs. The wind there was a liar too, swirling through the canopy. But he didn't need a flag. He watched how the rain fell and the way a single leaf trembled. He squeezed the trigger. The memory ended with the soft thud of a suppressed shot, swallowed by the jungle dot back at the range. The sun beat down. Dean's eyes refocused on Gunnery Sergeant Miller. His expression hadn't changed, but he carried a weightier presence. The rifle was not a museum piece. It was part of him. Evans watched the exchange with a tightening unease. He respected the chain of command, but he also respected elders. Miller's blatant disrespect felt wrong. He recognized the quiet groundskeeper from around the base and had heard rumors from old salts in the armory about the man's past. Miller, flushed with wounded pride, doubled down. "I'm not asking again. This is a restricted area. You're a civilian and a safety risk. Put the weapon down and step away from the firing line." Evans couldn't confront the gunnery sergeant directly, but he could act. "Gunny," he said, standing, "my spotting scope's reticle is swimming. I think the nitrogen seal blew. Permission to take it to the armory for repair." "Whatever. Get it fixed. We're not packing up until we hit this target," Miller said. Distracted, Evans grabbed his scope and jogged away, heart hammering, but not to the repair shop. He ducked behind a line of Humvees, pulled out his phone, and dialed. After 2 rings, a gravelly voice answered. "Armory Master Gunnery, Sergeant Phillips speaking." "Master Guns, it's Lance Corporal Evans from Charlie Company," Evans said, lowering his voice and glancing back at the firing line. "Gunny Miller's tearing into Dean Peters, the groundskeeper. He brought an old M40, and Gunny's about to have him arrested." A long pause stretched on the line. Then Philip's tone shifted, tight, urgent, stripped of gruffness. Son, are you telling me Dean Peters is on that range right now? Yes, Master Guns. Stay right there. Don't let Gunny Miller touch him. Do whatever you have to. I'm making a call. The line clicked dead, hiding behind the Humvee. Evans felt a new dread, as if he'd just pulled a pin on a grenade. Colonel Marcus Hayes, commanding officer of the Marine Raider Training Center, sat in a budget meeting when an aide burst in, pale and breathless. Sir, priority call from Master Gunnery Sergeant Phillips at the Armory. He says it's Whiskey Jack protocol. Hayes frowned. He'd never heard of a Whiskey Jack protocol, but he knew Phillips didn't exaggerate. He picked up his phone. What he heard stiffened him. At Whiskey Jack range with Gunny Miller's team. Who's there? Say the name again. A long pause, and then a look of stunned recognition crossed his face. Shock washing over him. Asterisk, are you absolutely certain? Colonel Hayes demanded into the phone. He listened for another second, then slammed the receiver down so hard the sound echoed through the room, making his captain flinch. He rose abruptly, his chair scraping across the floor. The budget meeting was forgotten. Captain, he barked, his tone sharp with authority. Get my vehicle. Now, have the base sergeant major meet me at the front gate in 2 minutes. We're going to Whiskey Jack range lights and sirens. Back on the range, Gunnery Sergeant Miller had lost his patience. The old man's calm defiance was more infuriating than open argument. That's it. I've had enough of this circus, he snapped, stepping closer to Dean until he was nearly chest to chest. Sir, I'm ordering you to vacate this range immediately. If you refuse, I'll place you under apprehension myself and have the MPs escort you off base. He placed a firm hand on Dean's shoulder to drive the point home. You're interfering with a live-fire exercise and endangering my Marines. This conversation is over. Dean didn't move, didn't even blink. He simply looked down at Miller's hand, then up into the younger Marine's face. His eyes showed no anger, no fear, only deep, quiet pity. That was when the first siren pierced the air. A distant wail, strange and out of place in the stillness of the desert range. Heads turned toward the dirt road leading from the main base. A cloud of dust rose fast, not one vehicle, but several. 2 black command Humvees and a military police cruiser. Lights flashing, engines roaring, tearing across the road. The convoy screeched to a halt just yards from the firing line. Doors slammed open before the wheels had even stopped turning. Colonel Hayes emerged first, immaculate uniform, expression carved in stone. Behind him strode the base sergeant major, a figure of pure authority. The range fell silent. The young snipers froze at attention. Gunnery Sergeant Miller stood paralyzed, his hand still resting on Dean's shoulder, confusion and dread washing over his face. In 15 years of service, he had never seen the base commander and sergeant major arrive anywhere with such urgency. Colonel Hayes didn't even glance at him. His gaze went straight to Dean. Each step he took across the gravel was deliberate, heavy with purpose. He stopped in front of the old man, eyes narrowing as he saw Miller's hand. Miller jerked his hand away as though burned. Then, to everyone's shock, Colonel Hayes snapped to the sharpest salute anyone on that range had ever seen. Spine rigid, arm locked, eyes filled with respect. Mr. Peters, his voice thundered across the silent field. Sir, I offer my deepest apologies for the conduct of my Marines. There is no excuse for the disrespect you've been shown today. A stunned silence rippled through the line. The young snipers could only stare. Their gunnery sergeant stood like a man turned to stone, his jaw slack, his face pale. The sergeant major stepped close to Miller and hissed in a voice colder than steel. Gunnery sergeant, what in God's name were you thinking? Colonel Hayes held his salute until Dean gave a small, tired nod. Only then did he lower his arm. He turned toward the assembled Marines, his tone shifting to one of command, firm, precise, impossible to ignore. Marines, he began, you've been failing this exercise all morning because you think your technology makes you marksmen. You've been beaten by a mile of air, and in your frustration, your leader chose to disrespect a man whose boots he isn't worthy to polish. He gestured toward Dean. For your education, he continued, allow me to introduce the man you've just insulted. This is Chief Warrant Officer 5 Dean Peters, retired. He wrote the doctrine on high-angle and extreme crosswind shooting you're all struggling with. In Vietnam, the enemy didn't know our names, but they had one for him. They called him the Ghost of the Ashau Valley. Every young face turned toward Dean. Reverend, Mr. Peters holds the 3rd longest confirmed kill in Marine Corps history. Hayes went on. A shot taken in a monsoon, in winds that make today look calm. And he made it. The colonel paused. With the very rifle your gunnery sergeant called a museum piece. He turned to Dean. Sir, would you do us the honor of showing these men how it's done? Dean nodded quietly and walked to the firing line. His movements were slow but sure, each one economical, deliberate. He lay prone on the mat, resting the old M40's forend on his battered rucksack. No bipod, no digital readouts, your computers chase data, he said evenly, his voice carrying across the range. You need to see signs. Look at that shimmer above the rocks at 1,000 yards. It's drifting right to left. A thermal, but that grass at 1,500, it's leaning toward us. The wind's folding back. The flag's catching the outer current, not the one that matters. You've got to find the window in the wind. He made a few small adjustments to the scope. Simple, confident, human. Settled his cheek against the worn wood, exhaled half a breath. The world went still. The M40 cracked, a sharp, clean report that echoed with history. For 2.5 seconds. There was only the sound of the wind. Then came the distinct, beautiful clang of bullet meeting steel. Dead center. The Marines erupted in cheers and applause, their earlier tension dissolving into awe. Colonel Hayes smiled faintly, then turned to Miller, his voice low and lethal. Gunnery Sergeant, your arrogance blinded you to your duty. Your job isn't just to be a sniper, it's to make snipers. You had a living legend standing here, offering wisdom freely, and you treated him like a trespasser. You've failed. Miller stiffened, shame etched across his face. Sir, no excuse, sir. Correct, Hayes replied coldly. There is none. You and your team will report for a week of remedial training in wind estimation and fieldcraft under Mr. Peters. If he's willing. Dean rose slowly, his joints protesting. He placed a gentle hand on Miller's shoulder, the same one Miller had grabbed in anger. The gear helps, he said quietly, but it doesn't replace this. He tapped his temple. The wind doesn't care about your computer, Gunny, it just is. You've got to learn to listen to it, not just measure it. As he stood there holding the rifle, another memory surfaced, a young corporal, a lifetime ago, receiving this very weapon from a battle-hardened master sergeant. She's not fancy, the old Marine had said. She's heavy. She'll kick you if you're careless, but she'll never lie. The world will, the wind, the heat, the jungle, but this rifle won't. Learn her language. The rifle wasn't just steel and wood. It was a legacy wisdom passed from one generation of warriors to the next. Weeks later, Whiskey Jack Range was transformed. Each morning, the elite sniper team, including a humbled Gunnery Sergeant Miller, sat in a semicircle on the dust, not behind rifles, but in front of Dean Peters. He held up blades of grass, showing how their movement told the truth that sensors missed. He taught them to read mirage like a map, to trust their eyes and instincts over numbers. The Marine Corps later added a new section to its sniper school curriculum, the Peters Wind Doctrine. A month later, Miller, now off duty and in civilian clothes, wandered into a hardware store. In the gardening aisle, he spotted Dean, studying tomato seeds. Mr. Peters, Miller said, his voice softer now. Dean looked up and smiled, warm, easy, grandfatherly. Gunny, how are those tomatoes of yours? Miller blinked. Sir, saw you planting last week, Dean said with a wink. You put 'em too close together. They'll choke each other out. He had noticed everything. Miller smiled, humbled. Sir, I just wanted to thank you. You taught me more in a week than I learned in 5 years. Dean nodded and clapped his shoulder. You're a good Marine, son. You were just trying to read the book instead of the weather. He held up the seed packet. It's all about paying attention to the little things. As he turned to leave, he added quietly, just keep listening, son. Always keep listening. Miller watched him go. The quiet old man who had reminded an entire generation that the strongest weapon isn't the one in your hands, but the wisdom in your mind. If you were inspired by Dean Peters' story of quiet courage and timeless skill, hit that like button, share this story with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Veterans Valor, where the legends of America's humble heroes live on.